All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? Last week we, of course, reviewed The Wild Bunch, maybe one of the least controversial movies ever made. Would you agree with that, Brian?
Yeah, it's a romp. It's very sweet. It's very sentimental. I watch it with my gram when I visit home. Everyone loves The
Exactly.
Wild Bunch.
Everybody fucking loves The Wild Bunch. And, we already reviewed, of course, that movie, which is a Sam Peckinpah movie. So this week, let's continue on the series with a movie that is even less controversial. It's called Straw Dogs. You ever heard of it, Brian?
Why don't we just watch Sleepless in Seattle, Taylor? How about we watch a Pixar movie?
Let's watch another unproblematic movie like I Am Sam or something.
Yeah, something really heartwarming, just like Straw Dogs.
Yeah, so before we get into the plot here, this is an extremely controversial movie, but this week we're going to be reviewing the classic firestorm of controversy movie from Sam Peckinpah, Straw Dogs. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Moment of the Week.
Week.
Woo! Yeah! All right. And Brian, I have a cringe generational segment. I think this is specifically a cringe millennial segment that is not related to Straw Dogs because honestly, I love Straw Dogs, but it bums me out and I don't want to find anything super related to Straw Dogs. So I chose something that was not related to Straw Dogs at all. So I'm going to be honest with you.
Of course.
But this one's just as morbid, maybe, and also pretty problematic. So this week, I want to talk about a fanfic, which is, of course, something I don't think we've ever actually talked about, but is something that is an extremely millennial topic.
Yeah, I don't know if Zoomers do fanfics. Do y'all do fanfics? Is that part of their online, upbringing, like it was for us?
No, I don't think so. I think they mostly do, TikTok fan cam and shipping stuff.
Yeah, they stan things, which is kind of like fanfic. Like they imagine things in the same way, but not quite.
No, they're not on fucking LiveJournal or whatever the fuck, whatever we did back in the day, which I never did to be clear, but what other fucking millennials did back in the day.
Yeah, just kind of unavoidable as a millennial, especially if you're like us, we're kind of nerdy or whatever. You definitely had friends that were on LiveJournal that were writing some goofy shit, or showing you goofy shit that they thought was really cool, and you had to be like, yeah, it's real, that's real cool.
Yeah, that's really fucking cool. And I have an excerpt of one of those really cool fanfics. Now, I'm not going to go over the whole thing. I'm only going to go over 2 paragraphs. And the audience at home, they have no idea what the fuck is going to happen here. But I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs from an excerpt of a fanfic called Until the End of Time. Now, once again, this is a completely real fanfic. I think it also might have been a troll fanfic, but somebody wrote this. Somebody put effort into this. But the fanfic begins like this. Oh, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Oh, just saying, having read this, being familiar with it, the amount of effort put into it, the amount of time spent writing it, kind of makes it immaterial whether it's intended to be a troll or not, in my opinion.
Yes, but like I said, I want to read this real quick. But yes, there is definitely some argumentation whether this is real or not. But I'm going to say this is real because I think it's funnier that way. But either way, it starts off like this. A girl sighed as she sat in her room, staring at her wall. She just finished writing in her diary and had nothing to do. Life was boring in the secret annex, but it was better than the alternative. It was all right talking to Peter and Margot, but they were both such quiet people, unlike the always active Anne. All of a sudden, a flash of light appeared in the room. Anne jumped back, stifling a scream. Before she could run out of the closed door, she noticed that the person who appeared in the flash was not a Nazi officer, but someone she had never seen before. His clothes were very strange, and his hair was in a spiky style that was totally new to her. She stood against the wall, wary of the stranger, but he walked towards her and smiled, extending a hand. "My name is Goku," he said. Anne mysteriously put her hand in his. He bent down and kissed it softly, then let go. Anne blushed, feeling something she had never felt before go off inside of her. "My name is Anne Frank," she replied quietly. I'm not going to continue on, but I promise you it gets so much better at the very end of the fanfic. I don't even want to spoil it to the audience because the ending this is fucking insane, but needless to say, it goes crazy. It goes so hard.
It is a classic. It is a classic of millennial internet culture. There's an argument to be made that it might be a troll. Like I said, I don't really think it matters because it's insane. It's an insane thing to write.
It is. Even as a joke, this takes so much effort to do as a joke, to be honest. Even though it's not that long, it's only maybe 5 or 6 pages long, but it's just insane.
I think it's more to me like the very notion of it is insane.
Yes, and like I said, I'm not going to read any more of it because I really don't want to spoil the audience at home. I'll put the link in the description for this episode, but please read this whole thing. It's not very long. It takes maybe 10 minutes to read, but I promise you it's worth it. It is so fucking funny.
And if you're a Dragon Ball fan, it might give you some insight into the characterization of Goku. Also, if you study atrocities throughout history, maybe give it a view. There's things to be gleaned from all sorts of literature. So, give it a shot.
Exactly. Art is all very morally relative. That's for sure. You know what?
Everything, we live in a rich tapestry of ideas and feelings of the physical and metaphysical, and that includes this story where Goku befriends Anne Frank.
Yes, but speaking of moral relativism, I think that actually leads perfectly into our review this week. So
you don't say.
Yes. So, once again, we're going to be reviewing the classic film Straw Dogs. So, let's get into some quick details here. So, the film came out in 1971, and the first trivia fact I have here is actually related to the title. So, the title comes from the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, who wrote, "Heaven and earth are not humane and regard the people as straw dogs." And straw dogs were used as ceremonial objects for religious sacrifices in ancient China. So, interesting thing there. And
so, a couple of reads on that will become apparent as we go through our review and synopsis. As an expression, a straw dog just means something that is created, destroyed, and discarded as trash. There's a more literal read on it. A straw dog can apply to a person and it can apply to a building if you're using it in the non-literal sense as an expression. And those both are applicable to this film, as we'll find out.
Yes, very much so. And this film was rated R. And the next trivia fact I had here is this film was banned in the UK from 1984 to 2002. Now, to be clear, this is not technically a video nasty because it was not included on the list, but it's often included in the video nasty moral panic that happened in the UK. So I consider it an honorary video nasty, even though it technically wasn't one, but it was still banned in the UK for 18 years. And once again, this was directed by Sam Peckinpah. And interestingly enough, another fun fact, I have so many trivia facts I wanted to include in this, but the original production of this movie was thrown into jeopardy when Sam Peckinpah caught pneumonia after an all-night binge drinking session. And he was only allowed to continue directing the film after he promised that he would remain sober, which is a promise that he kept for, I'm assuming, the entire filming, and then immediately went back to being a sloppy drunk. I'm assuming. I don't know that, because he was a pretty infamous alcoholic.
Hardcore alcoholic, whoremongering Sam Peckinpah, one of the great artists of his generation.
100%. A studio man and New Hollywood guy. That was a very rare combination, for sure.
Well, not only a New Hollywood guy, but also a very mercenary New Hollywood guy. Basically, very openly said he was a hired gun and he made the movies he was hired to make money, which is very interesting when you consider how transgressive the films he made were.
No, absolutely. And then the screenplay was done by David Zelig Goodman and, once again, Sam Peckinpah. It was based on the novel The Siege of Trencher's Farm by Gordon M. Williams. And the next trivia fact I had here was Gordon Williams was so upset by the adaptation of his novel that he vowed to never sell another of his works to an American again. And from what I read, the novel and this film have very little in common.
Yeah, they're pretty different. I did read a good chunk of the novel in preparation for this episode. It's not that good. It's fine. I truly think this is an example, and you see this with a lot of film adaptations prior to, let's say, the 1980s. This is truly a case where a studio bought up the rights to a story and they made it good. There is some insight in reading the story, especially in, things about, rural English culture that it makes clearer, to, Americans like us. But Peckinpah, for better or worse, he elevated the source material. And I do mean there are arguments that it was for worse, but he took it to a more memorable place.
No, well, certainly we'll talk about the memorable scenes in this movie, because there's a lot of them in this particular movie, for fucking sure.
Oh my god, yeah.
It was produced by Daniel Melnick. And, of course, we talked about Peckinpah's accomplishments in last episode, so just listen to last episode for all of his film credits. And David Zelig Goodman was a playwright and screenwriter for TV and film. He's most known for writing such movies and TV shows as Lovers and Other Strangers, this film, Logan's Run, a movie we are absolutely going to review at some point, The Eyes of Laura Mars. I know we've talked about it, and I'm surprised neither of us has seen it because it's basically a perfect movie for us, but we've both never seen it, which is just crazy.
Yeah, we should do an episode on it. I already know it'll be a good show.
No, absolutely. Naked City, the TV show, the TV shows The Untouchables, and the TV show Combat, with an exclamation point, which I believe had Vic Morrow. Rest in peace, Vic Morrow. He died a very horrible death. I'm sure everybody knows about Vic Morrow's horrible fucking death and how fucking, was it, not Max Landis, because that's his shit-ass son. John Landis is absolutely going to burn in hell if there is a hell, for fucking sure for that.
A guy I thought was really cool when I was a kid before I knew that story. I'd see him in documentaries, I'd hear quotes from him in books, I'd be like, that seems like a cool older guy, and oof.
Yeah, oof is the least you could possibly say. And then his son turned out to be a shithead too, of course.
Truly a murderer.
Yeah.
An actual murderer of children.
An actual murder of children and one elderly man on top of it. Yeah, just a bad man. And Gordon L. Williams was once again a British author, and he did lots of stuff, but nothing relevant to this film other than obviously the book that was the basis for this movie. And Daniel Melnick was a producer, and he was also the former head of MGM. He produced or was involved in such films as, once again, this film, All That Jazz, First Family, Altered States, Unfaithfully Yours, Footloose, Roxanne, Air America, LA Story. He did so much shit. Network, Westworld. He did so much shit. Of course, being the head of MGM at one point too, but still. Definitely somebody who I got to give credit for. And interestingly enough, he actually got his start working as like a film hand as a teenager and worked his way up to be head of MGM, which is a beautiful fucking story.
When you hear stories like that from, prior decades, it is crazy. Like, obviously, bootstraps logic is all bullshit. But there was a time, in like I guess, automation and even like everything being about online networking and the shit, where like you could get a major career in the arts by just being around and working and meeting people and making an impression on them. Like, probably the last time you could do that, right, we'll say, is probably the 1970s, right? That was a time when you could do that in film and have a really good career.
And nowadays, we're just going to be sweeping the halls of work, and we'll just be like, maybe one day I'll get to fucking work my way up to the CEO or something, and then you can't even get like a 50-cent an hour raise.
God, by the time, in 10 years, the CEO of Warner Brothers is just going to be an AI. All the current CEOs are going to be like ushers at the theaters.
Yeah, really. This movie is 117 minutes long. It grossed roughly $2.2 million, and it grossed $8 million. And on Rotten Tomatoes, it has an 82% critics and audience score. So the first one we've seen where the critics and audience scores were the exact same. So really cool to see that there is a critic and audience consensus, because that is definitely not always the case that we've seen with this show. Like, some movies have like a 5% critic score and then like 89% audience score. Those are some of my favorite movies of all time, because like the disconnect is just so insane in those fucking movies. Like, obviously some famous examples being all the Kurt Wimmer movies. I learned John Q recently, which is a movie that is maybe more relevant than when it was even like fucking came out. But that movie has like a 25% and like a 75% audience score, and I'm like, what the fuck? Are you serious? That blew my mind when I read that one.
Interesting to me for critics and audiences to be so on the same page with Straw Dogs, because it's such a divisive film, and I would almost expect the critical response to be overwhelmingly more positive than the audience response, so that's curious.
It really is. Oh, and I'm also just checking right now. It's 26% critic score and 78% for John Q. So a 3 times difference. That's fucking crazy to me.
Wowzers.
Do a lot of critics not have to deal with health insurance issues? I don't fucking know. That's a very relatable film, I feel, to be honest with you.
You know what it probably is in the case of John Q? And I'm not like an anti-critic person. I don't like anti-critic. Critics don't know what the kind of people like. I like film, like academic film criticism and music criticism and all that shit. But like in the case of John Q, I would guess that there are these film critics who they know a lot more about like high film than the general American audience. And they're kind of going like, well, how does this film succeed artistically? How ambitious is it? How challenging is it? And to just a general American audience, they're going to see John Q and it's going to resonate with them because it's like talking about things that are important to them and anxieties they have. And they're not thinking about all this extraneous. They're not thinking about John Q in the tradition of like the social action film or whatever critics are thinking of. They're just going, wow, I feel that way sometimes, No,
totally, 100%. It's a very populist film versus obviously some of the others, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so speaking of populism, well, not really populist, but let's get into the synopsis here for this, once again, infamous film. So the movie begins in England in the early 70s. After securing a research grant to study stellar structures, American applied mathematician David Sumner, played by Dustin Hoffman. And the next trivia fact I had here was Dustin Hoffman was not usually a fan of violent films, and admitting that he'd only taken this role for the money. So, and I think that's really interesting, right? Because, like, needless to say, I think what we've learned about Dustin Hoffman since then, he has a lot in common with this character, if I'm being honest.
A thing that I see in discourse, I think in the old discourse when people would get outraged about this film, and even I looked at contemporary, we talk a lot of shit about millennials and Zoomers and how they're kind of puritanical about film, and they don't really, I know it's a cliche to say, oh, media literacy, but there really is like a lack of it. But a lot of people don't seem to understand that Hoffman's character in this film is bad. He is not intended to be good. The other thing that in our kind of setup here point out is, and this is made a lot clearer in the book in the opening of it, this isn't just England, this is rural Cornwall, which to me was not clear when I first watched this film in high school. This is like a farm town of about 15 miles that the people living in have largely never left. They're basically untouched by modernity. So it's not just like a small town, it's literally frozen in time. And one of the big conceits of the book, one of the few things I think it does really well, is it keeps talking about making allusions to the American conflict in Vietnam and to the space race, and then kind of contradicting them with how trapped in the fucking 1800s Cornwall is. So here comes Dustin Hoffman with his wife, a local, just this American academic who has no business in Cornwall, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where it's basically the British equivalent of like the fucking hillbilly sticks, like Appalachia, basically. Although not quite, because this wasn't as much of like a mining area.
Well, it's farming instead of mining.
And farming, yes.
And of course, heavily implied in both the film and the book that a phrase throughout the book and the portions I read are Dando marries its own, and then it comes back around to saying Dando has married its own for too long, implying incest is a problem in this community.
Interesting. I could definitely imagine that, for sure. I mean, all British people kind of look inbred.
I don't think it's as clear in the film that that's the implication, but it does sort of elaborate what's going on with one of our characters later on.
Oh, yes, and we will definitely get to that point. But I definitely have an interpretation of what character I believe you're talking about. But anyways, he moves into this town with his wife, Amy, played by Susan George. And the next trivia fact I had here is that Dustin Hoffman disagreed with the casting of Susan George, as he felt his character would never marry such a Lolita-ish kind of girl, which I don't agree with that either. I think Dustin Hoffman was absolutely wrong on this. I think the casting of her is pretty much perfect for the type of character that Dustin Hoffman is playing here.
Let's get this out of the way. Peckinpah, he is a misogynist. There's no way around this. We made little jokes about it in the Wild Bunch episode. I think we kind of alluded to it in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way. He is. There's no way I can... And I do think he, thinks about what women go through and what they experience. I do think he has a certain level of understanding of that, and I think it's fundamental to what this film is about. But there is a deep current of misogyny to his films. The issue with Hoffman thinking that his character would not marry Susan George because she was too young and too much of a sex pet, basically, is that he was overestimating the character, much like audiences do. He was having too much faith in the character he was playing.
Yeah, and we will certainly get into it, obviously, in the synopsis here, but he is a bad person.
I mean, it'll become more apparent. He's an asshole. From the start of the film, he's an asshole to her. They're all
he's an
bad
asshole,
too.
and he's contemptible to everybody, and he has contempt for everyone.
He is an asshole to the townspeople, who also are bad. This isn't any justification of their actions, but the same way they're looking down on him, he is looking down on them. They're a bunch of hillbillies to them. They don't know what they couldn't write a mathematics textbook like he is.
No, exactly. They couldn't enjoy a Montesquieu fucking quote or whatever.
Yep.
Oh, God. Eventually, we meet all the excellent characters in this town. So Amy's ex-boyfriend is one of them, played by Del Henney. His name is Charlie Venner in the movie. Along with his friends, Norman Scott, played by Ken Hutchison, Chris Causey, played by Jim Norton. Not James Norton or Jim Norton from fucking Opie and Anthony. Different Jim Norton, although probably just as much of a misogynist in real life. I'm kidding. I shouldn't cast those kind of aspersions on this Jim Norton, but maybe. And Phil Ridaway, played by Donald Webster. They immediately resent the fact that an apparently meek outsider has married one of their own. own. Scott, a former convict, confides in Causey his jealousy of Venner's past relationship with Amy. David meets Venner's uncle, Tom Hedden, played by Peter Vaughn, a violent drunkard whose teenage daughter, Janice, flirts with Henry Niles. Now, in the synopsis here, they describe him as a mentally deficient man. I don't quite think he's mentally deficient. My read on it is that he's just a pedophile.
I mean, no, he's mentally deficient to some degree.
He could be a mentally deficient pedophile, but my read on it is that he was a pedophile.
You're right. He is the village pervert. He's also like slow or whatever you want to say. It is heavily implied more in the book, but pretty well indicated that he and there's actually other characters that could be read as being potentially inbred. But this character is, he's the village pervert, but he's also like slow. He's kind of doted upon at the same time that everyone is like, well, don't leave your daughters alone with him.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, maybe I shouldn't have said pedophile specifically, but that was just my read on it because he's always playing with the children. And that was like, why did you put him away? Exactly. And he always kind of has smirks when he's hanging out with children and the town ate him.
Exactly.
So I just assumed he was a pedophile on top of being mentally deficient possibly. But yeah, I totally get what you mean. And then next trivia fact I had here, once again, I had so many trivia facts, but Henry Niles in the movie Limp was not part of the script. David Warner, who is the actor who played him, had broken his leg before production, but was able to walk with a cane by the time principal of photography started, but because he had broken his foot before shooting, he was considered uninsurable and was not credited in the film's credits, which I think is very interesting.
That sucks so much.
It does, doesn't it? Isn't that just such a shitty thing? Like, he's a pretty prominent character, especially near the end of the movie once we get into it.
No, he is.
And he doesn't get his name in the credits due to an insurance technicality. That sucks.
That has to be a SAG violation, right?
Well, the thing was that this movie was shot in England, so I don't think SAG has any authority there.
Yeah. You're right. Thank you. I apologize. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, it's an American-made movie, but it was shot in England with mostly English actors, so I guess.
No, you're right. You are right.
The Sumners have taken an isolated farmhouse, Trencher's Farm, that once belonged to Amy's father. They hire Scott and Causey to re-roof its garage, and when impatient with lack of progress, add Venner and his cousin Bobby to the workforce. Now, this is where a lot of the things start falling apart. I mean, they were obviously kind of falling apart from the beginning. There's so much tension in this town. Obviously, Amy's not happy to see Charlie again. She even, drives past him pretty aggressively and almost, hits them to, kind of, intimidate them or whatever. There's obviously some significant tension here.
Even before the townsmen being hired to work on the house, the whole thing is they're making fun of our protagonist, right? He doesn't know that. He's too naive. He finds himself, he's this intellectual. He thinks he's so much smarter than them. They're subtly emasculating him to each other and to his wife, and she sees it and he does not. And they already have this contempt for him. He's an outsider in this ancient town. He's kind of looking down on them, and of course they're looking down on him. Him hiring them to work on his house, which, by the way, that's a recurring theme, is that he views this house as his. It's not his. It's a Cornish house that was inherited by a Cornish daughter of a Cornish man who built it. And this man, who now thinks of the house as his, who thinks of himself as the man of the house, is hiring Cornish men to work on it instead of working on it himself. So that's how they see him. This isn't his house. He doesn't belong here. He's not even doing the work on the house. He's making us do it because he can't.
Exactly. And, we'll obviously get to it, especially at the end, because the contradictions are so obvious at the end. But this movie is really the inversion of, British imperialism being brought back. That's essentially, I think, ultimately what it is. Because, of course, Britain was the imperial core for centuries. And then by the time this movie came out, they were finally losing their empire. And then the Americans were coming up as the sole power. And the American gets, well, once again, we won't spoil it quite. But let's just say the Americans treat the locals here like the British treated colonized subjects in their colonies. Let's just say that. Yeah. It's the total inversion here. I don't know if that was quite intentional, but I find it very interesting. I'll just say that.
I don't know if I think Peckinpah intended it, but I think he was aware on some level of the irony. And if I can get a little hoodoo-y with it, I would even argue that maybe there is some sort of kind of Jungian understanding of that, even if Peckinpah wasn't consciously thinking about making that statement.
No, totally fair. So tension in their marriage soon become apparent. Amy criticizes David's condescension towards her and suggests that cowardice was his true reason for leaving a volatile, politicized university campus in America. David withdraws deeper into his studies, ignoring both the hostility of the locals and Amy's dissatisfaction. His aloofness results in Amy's attention-gathering pranks and provocative demeanor towards the workmen, particularly Venner. David also struggles to be accepted by the educated locals, as seen in conversations with the vicar Reverend Barney Hood, played by Colin Welland, and his wife, and Major John Scott, played by T.P. McKenna, who is the local magistrate or sheriff. And I do find a lot of these things interesting because, once again, as we've talked about, we're seeing the sociological interplay here once again with this academic academic type American coming to this, once again, small town. He clearly doesn't understand these people. They don't really want to understand him or even try to understand him. There's obviously this significant barrier, this very significant cultural barrier on both ends that neither of them really want to, like, understand each other or reconcile is probably the best way I can describe it, right? And it all comes to a head in a very violent way towards the end. Is once again, we're just going to keep talking about that here. Well, but yeah, we want to have to talk about the tensions, because David just treats Amy like total shit. He's abusive and he's extremely patriarchal and condescending. He basically wants to treat her as like his housewife, and she doesn't want to be the housewife. She's this empowered second wave feminist woman. She doesn't wear a bra around the house. She's very like lackadaisical towards her own body and her own nudity, which obviously nothing wrong with that. There's obviously nothing wrong with that, right? But this is an invitation to these creepy ass local fucking guys. Well,
the other thing with that I think this movie captures really well, that I have like had women describe to me, is when they're feeling, even just being leered at in a certain way or interacting with, is the mix that like predatory men have of like attraction and contempt towards like the women they're objectifying. The really scary feeling of those two, like they're kind of angry while they're like fantasizing about a woman or coming on to her. And I've had a couple women describe that, which is a feeling I've never experienced and hopefully never will. You know, the thing with Amy, right, is that she was a local. She grew up in this town. She has roots here, but she's left and come back, and she's returned this kind of liberated woman who likes her body, is comfortable with her body. She doesn't act like other women in the town. And of course, that's probably enticing to the locals, and it probably also, even to the men, probably makes them mad, because they're these very conservative, like these weird hillbillies, basically. So there's a lot of different dynamics going on here. You could make an observation that some of Peckinpah's own weirdness about women is starting to creep in at this point in the movie. I do think he does deal with it with a bit of, I don't know how much I would accuse Peckinpah of putting the blame on Amy at this point in the film.
No, I don't think so either. Like, once again, obviously we've said Peckinpah is a misogynist, or I should say was, because he's been dead for decades now. But I think, and once again, you're totally right, I think he had a degree of introspection towards women's feelings and pain and all those things. He was still a misogynist, but he had more introspection, I would say, than people give him credit for.
Yeah, and I think, Wild Bunch, probably not. Like, we said that flat out. Like, but in this film, I actually think the emotional core of the film is Amy. Is her experience, it's how she deals with the things she is put through. She is the only character in the film, and she's not even very likable. The first half of the film, she's actually kind of annoying intentionally. But, they're writing her as like a bratty little girl, which is, not to use this word, it's potentially problematic on Peckinpah's part, and I hate saying that word. Sometimes it's the easiest one. But she is the only... Can you think of another character in this film that you would want to be in a room with, that you would want to talk to for more than a couple of sentences than Amy? I don't think you can.
Honestly, the vicar is probably the closest one, in my opinion, because he's like a magician, and one of our best podcast friends is a magician.
This is true.
But he's the closest one, I would say. He's smart, he's pretty cultured for this town, and he seems likable enough.
Sure, okay, that's fair. That is fair.
But that's pretty much it. Maybe the barman, too. The barman seems okay.
I think the barman's a psycho. I think there's little things in how he talks in movies that give him away as a psycho like the rest of the men in this town.
Okay, that's fair, too. Yeah. Well, once again, we'll get to that at the scene that I know what you're talking about. But he's the other one where I could be like, okay, I'll get a drink from you and I'll leave in 2 minutes. Maybe.
Right.
When David finds their cat hanging dead in their bedroom, Amy believes that Causey or Scott is responsible. She presses David to confront the workmen, but he is too intimidated. The men invite David to go hunting. They take him to the moor and leave him there with the promise of driving birds towards him. And then we're going to get into the most infamous scene in this movie in just a second, but Brian, go ahead.
Regarding the dead cat, this is really masterfully laid out. Amy loves this cat. This is her cat. David does not like the cat. He's a dick to it. He pushes it away. Classic
he throws
men-women
food at it. He's like an addicted
he throws shit at
animal.
Classic men-women bullshit. The thing with the cat dying is one of our townsmen, these weird, leering, wretch townsmen, one of them is a career rat catcher. That is his job. That is all he does, is he catches rats around the town. So Amy knows who killed the cat. It's the guy that gets paid to catch rats. Who else would it be? Because he doesn't want a cat there. And David probably knows that too. He just doesn't want to talk about it. Because he doesn't care about the cat. He doesn't care about Amy's feelings about the cat. But more importantly, he's scared. He doesn't want to deal with it. He doesn't know how to relate to these guys and how to assert himself to them.
Yeah, he's honestly he's a coward. And they say that later in the movie, he's just a coward. That's the best way I could put it. I can tell you what, if anybody killed my fucking animal, you better believe there would be at least a beatdown.
There would be a confrontation, and that would be the end of your association with them, one way or the other, right?
Absolutely.
They wouldn't continue to work for you at your house.
Yeah, you fucking weirdo. And not only did they kill your animal, but they also broke into your house and are harassing, like everything. These are people who don't want anywhere near you.
They're also stealing Amy's panties. That's actually very casually said earlier before the cat dies. Someone steals her underwear. And David just does not care. He just is not interested.
It's the classic psychopath fucking escalation. This is a thing you need to either address or run away from, and he's not willing to really do either.
Yeah.
He's just willing to sit there and allow it to happen and continue to stew and get worse.
Yeah, he pulls back into his studies and his mathematics and basically lets Amy deal with it. Deal with the harassment she's suffering and the harassment he's suffering too, but he's just going to pretend it's not there.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's no other way to put it. Like, and listen, I understand we're both from the Midwest. We know plenty of passive aggressive people. But like, I feel like almost nobody in Wisconsin would allow this fucking shit to happen. Like, this is a particularly cowardly motherfucker. Like, obviously.
Yeah, that's the tagline of the movie, right? It's something like, in the face of cowardice, a straw dog burns, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing a bit.
No, I think you're right. All right, so we finally have to get into easily the most controversial scene in this movie. So, with David away from home, once again on a hunting trip, Venner goes to Trencher's farm and pressures Amy sexually. After a time, she submits. There's a violent rape that happens. It's filmed in the way that eventually she, once again, submits to it, pretends to enjoy it, and then afterwards, another gentleman, I think it's one of them, I don't remember, but either way, that he rapes her after that at gunpoint. It's really bad. It's filmed very creepily. It's very problematic, is the best way to put it.
To make this clearer, Peckinpah, by his own account, says that 3/4 of the way through the first assault by an ex of hers, that she not only submits, but begins to enjoy it. This is Peckinpah's own account. I actually did not read this portion of the book. I wish I had. I assume that it's similar in the source material. So that is a specter that looms over this movie. How you feel about this obviously determines probably how you feel about this movie. But what is being portrayed? Well, there's arguments over degrees about it. And I've read over the years some different analysis of this film. There's a lot to analyze about it. But it is worth noting that from Sam Peckinpah's own interpretation, Amy not only submits, but ends up enjoying the initial rape. At which point, the second gentleman enters and rapes her at gunpoint, which she does not enjoy. But there is a lot going on here. Peckinpah's own interpretation of the movie is that while she does not welcome the advance or the assault, that because of everything going on with her losing respect for her husband and her feelings of, in the past having been attracted to this man who's assaulting to her, that she begins to enjoy it. Problematic is the simplest word I can use to describe it. There is an interpretation of this film, although Peckinpah never states this, and I don't believe this was his interpretation. You could interpret this film as saying that Amy led these men on, or that her bratty behavior in the first, let's say, quarter of the film is that she's being punished for that here. Obviously, we don't think that, and I don't think Peckinpah is saying that, but it's a rough scene, not just because of what's happening, but because of the subtext underneath it.
Yes, 100%. You put it in a way that I was not quite comfortable saying it, or maybe didn't have quite the right word, so I appreciate that, Brian. But I want to be clear here. This is a scene this is maybe the most walkout scene of almost any movie we've ever covered. Like, if you walked out during this, I don't blame you.
So when I watched this film, I've seen this film a few times. This is not the best point to point it out again. I'm a fan of Peckinpah as a filmmaker. I saw this film initially, I think, when I was 16 or 17. I rented it from the library. I was teaching myself about cinema and movie history. I'd read about it in some books. And I remember as basically a kid watching this, not, thinking, wow, that's fucked up. These are bad guys. But I don't know that I'd never had the experience of having women I know open up to me about their experiences with assault and things at that point in my life. So I was like, wow, that's messed up. And I just watched the movie. This week, I watched it a couple times, and both times after the scene, because obviously I've had different experiences at 33 that I did at 17, and I have maybe more understanding of what I'm seeing now, the gravity of it. After both points, I had to take a break and go like, okay, I need to collect my thoughts, because it's not just that it's an awful thing being portrayed, it's that there's troubling subtext to the scene, and troubling text to the scene that, you have to spend some time grappling with if you're going to talk about this film. So both times this week watching this film, after this scene, I did have to stop for the evening and think about how I felt about it, and then return to the film a few hours later.
No, totally understandable. So David eventually makes his way back. They abandoned him, obviously. This is a whole ruse for this to happen. And he gets back to the house, and other than a cryptic comment or some cryptic comments that she makes, it's never brought up into the forefront in the movie again. So David goes the entire movie never knowing that this happened, which is central to the ultimate conclusion of this movie.
Yes.
I know I just spoiled something, but that is central to the ultimate conclusion of this movie. It really is.
Well, and one of the things to remember too is, like, how could Amy tell him? He's cruel to her all the time. He doesn't take anything she says seriously. How is he going to react if she tries to tell him that this happened? Probably not in a sympathetic way. If we've been watching David's behavior, we as the audience should know that she certainly knows that. So she's just carrying this with her, as women are often made to do, you know?
No, totally. So after that, David fires the workmen for their slow progress. Later, the Sumners attend a church social evening where Amy becomes distraught on seeing her rapist. And of course, she's having PTSD flashbacks during the scene here. Janice invites Henry to leave with her, and in a building away from the crowd, she begins to seduce him. This is also a very problematic scene, but obviously it just succeeded the other extremely problematic scene on here because this girl's like, I think she's supposed to be like 14 or something. This girl's very young. So I want to be clear. It's not that, younger girls don't have crushes on older men. That does happen, but this kind of thing pretty much never happens. Let's be honest.
Right.
When Janice's brother notices she is missing, he is sent to search for her. And as he calls out for her, Henry panics and accidentally suffocates Janice to death. Now, that's the other fucked up thing in this. I read some review that it's like, well, this is, once again, just another part of the misogyny. And it's like, no, that was just an accident. Like, I don't know if that's misogyny. That was clearly an accident. This, like, mentally challenged guy suffocates this girl to death. It's like in fucking, what was that, Frankenstein when that happens?
That happens in Of Mice and Men is what you're thinking.
Of Mice and Men, yes.
So I will say, I think what critics are referring to is not misogyny in the story. It's an accident. I think they're talking about the blithe way that Peckinpah portrays the death of a young woman or a young girl as misogynistic.
Totally fair. Totally fair. The Sumners leave the social early, driving through thick fog, and accidentally hit Henry as he is escaping the scene.
At which point, David does the most moral thing he does at any point in the film.
Yes, that is very true. They take the injured Henry to their home and phone the pub to report the incident. The locals, who in the meantime have learned that Janice was last seen with Henry, are thereby alerted to his whereabouts. Soon, Hedden, Scott, Venner, Causey, and Ridaway are drunkenly pounding on the Sumners' door. Deducing their intention to lynch Henry, David refuses to let them take him, despite Amy's pleas. The standoff seems to unlock a territorial instinct in David to not allow violence in this home. Now, to be clear, though, it's one of those things where, once again, the end of this movie is basically a home invasion movie at the very end here. And this is where David finally grows a quote-unquote backbone. Film. Yeah, well, it is a home invasion film, and I've heard some people describe this as a rape revenge movie, but it is not a rape revenge movie.
No, it's not. No, everyone says that. That is giving David too much credit.
No, and that's the thing, though, too, is that, so obviously the guys, they escalate, they throw rocks in the home, they throw rats in the home. Eventually, the sheriff or magistrate comes, and the old drunken man accidentally shoots and kills him. And then at that point, they're into a frenzy, and they basically feel like they can do whatever they want. And that's when David finally steps into action, while also, by the way, assaulting his wife and telling her that if she tries to stop him, he's going to kill her on top of it, too. Well, and he just goes complete vigilante.
That's the thing is, this whole time, Amy is pleading with David to give them what they want. And he, ostensibly it's because he's like, well, we can't give, they're going to kill him. We just hit him with their car. He's entitled to a job. That is not why David does not want to give them this man. It's because that is the last bit of territoriality he has over his home, like you said. He does not care about Amy's fears. This is a woman she's just been violently raped by these men that are banging on their doors. David does not notice that at any point when she's acting strangely. He is absolutely nonplussed by the change he has gone through. And at this moment, he's not interested in the fear she's feeling. He's not interested in anything, but he's almost acting out, asserting himself like to her as much as to the men trying to invade his home, right? He's like kind of proving to her that she's wrong, which is what he's been obsessed with doing this whole movie, is like basically making her feel small.
Well, and that's the thing, though, too, is that, and you're totally right on that, and the reason that he finally basically steps up, for lack of a better word, I guess, is that he has been basically emasculated in every single way possible, including a way that he's not even aware of. So he's finally, reached that breaking point, and he's like, all right, they basically called me a pussy for so long, I'm finally going to stand up and fucking murder all these hillbillies, basically. But that's the thing, though, that makes, he's a bad person, because this could have been a situation that could have been diffused so many times before then, but it had to come to this finally because he refused to stand up, and he refused to listen to his wife. He refused to listen to all the people around him that were basically telling him implicitly that this is a bad situation.
He's a bad person because of that. He's also a bad person because at no point of this has nothing to do with his wife. This has nothing to do with her fear, her comfort in the film. That is immaterial to him. He is not acting from a moral standpoint. He has and has had since the beginning of the film the same capacity for violence, the same capacity for dehumanization as the locals in this town, as those men do. He has all of those same things in him, but he's convinced himself that he's above it, that he's very civil, that he's very erudite. He's the same as they are, and he's exercising that now. Throughout again, like you said, ultimately he strikes Amy, and he does that because she's trying to end this situation, to de-escalate it, and he wants to de-escalate it his way. He doesn't care about what happens to her, he doesn't really care what happens to the home.
No, he doesn't. And that's the thing is that, as Dustin Hoffman and I think of other people have tried to claim that, not necessarily that David is the hero, but he is ultimately our protagonist. But no, he is just as evil as basically everybody else in this fucking movie. I mean, he didn't rape anybody, but that's the only thing he hasn't done.
But by the end of the film, by the way he's treating his wife, you almost think like he could very well be capable of that.
Oh, easily, yeah. I mean, he threatened to break her neck once again, killing her if she gets in the way of him. I mean, it's one of those things where this is maybe one of the most nihilist movies ever made, or one of the most nihilist big budget movies ever made, I would say.
Yes, unquestionably.
So we're not going to get into all the details, but basically everybody dies except Amy and David and Henry, that's right. And David and Henry drive off, and Henry's like, I don't know my way home, and David goes, me neither. And then that's how the movie ends, with them driving off into the distance in the dark. Now, before we get to our Amazon reviews, I do want to say real quick, and this will of course be in our final thoughts, but I think this movie is visually incredibly beautiful. I love the visuals of this movie. The standoff at the end, the home invasion, it's shot so beautifully, the thick fog, and just the shadows and the lights. We always talk about how there's no color in movies anymore, but it is wild that even this bleak nihilistic film is still incredibly beautiful.
Well,
it's awesome.
This film was shot on a form of Technicolor and I don't know anything really about the technical side of filmmaking. I know next to nothing about it. I do know that this film was shot in a form of Technicolor that after about 1973 no longer existed. It is literally a type of color that I know people like Quentin Tarantino and Abel Ferrara have said that they have tried to replicate, and for whatever reason we cannot replicate this type of color filming. And what's interesting about that is, like you said, this is a very bleak film, and it's not really colorful. There's actually a lot of browns, a lot of shadows in it, but they still pop in a way that you just don't see in modern film.
Oh, no, totally. I want to be clear. This is not some campy 70s, Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of colorful.
But the colors are beautiful.
They are 100% in a way that basically no modern big budget movie is these days. So obviously we're doing it, shedding a tear to that for sure. But speaking of shedding tears, Brian, I do have our classic Amazon reviews section. Now, I was going to include more reviews, but to be honest with you, I only wanted to include one problematic review because the reviews in here were so revolting and problematic that I didn't want to include more of them because 80% of the reviews in this were pretty awful, just morally reprehensible. Oh. So I didn't want to include too many of those, but I do have one, but I'll save it, but you'll know immediately which problematic review is when I say it. Trust me, you'll know immediately where it's going.
Oh, no.
But our first review here is not a problematic one. So our first review here is from El Cabos, who gives us 5 stars. And the head of the review says, a classic. And the body of the review says, amazing to think that in December of 1971, theaters had Dirty Harry, A Clockwork Orange, and Straw Dogs. Whoa! Saw all 3 of them when I was 17 and all made a great impression. Now, I have to say, though, being a very late teenager, young adult, and in this era, I would have been pretty fucking happy, too. That is a pretty stacked film lineup. I would have been fucking pretty happy with that. Also,
that must have been fucking terrifying.
Not only terrifying, but then you had the hope, obviously, of... Wait, 1971, that was when Billy Jack came out, too, right?
Yes.
Oh my God, that's the year of Billy Jack too. 1971 was a pretty good movie year. Holy shit.
Yeah. Yeah. A pivotal year for the Millennials Are Old podcast in film.
Yeah, very much so. Straw Dogs was and remains a distinctly disturbing film. To what lengths will a man go to defend his home and family? Well, he doesn't really defend his family all that much, let's be honest with you.
Completely disinterested.
Completely disinterested. This is a longer version than what actually appeared on movie screens in 1971. This has lost none of its power. Dustin Hoffman is a nerdy mathematician who goes to live with his English wife in her local village. The locals see him as a weakling and a former flame rapes his wife. Well, thank you very much for that very curt description there, reviewer.
Yeah, let's just get it out of the way.
Yeah, Hoffman reaches the point where a line cannot be crossed. Well, he allows a lot of lines to be crossed, but that's neither here nor there. Despite everything, he will not allow a suspected child molester be taken and goes to extremes to defend his home. You'll never look at a bear trap the same way again. On a sad note, this is being remade and set in the Deep South. Are all the fools in Hollywood smoking dope? And also, by the way, I'm not going to talk about the remake really at all because it's completely pointless. But the one thing I will say on this is fucking Millennials are old, piece of shit extraordinaire James Woods was in that movie, and he just very recently lost his house. So he's the only person who's, or like one of
Does
only
he play David?
People. No, he does not. I think he plays the sheriff, I think.
Oh, okay.
Which makes sense. He's reprising his role from Cop.
It takes place in the same universe.
Yeah. Well, from the scene that I saw, it actually kind of seems to like he's doing the same shit. Seems like.
That's just how he dreams about acting. He wishes he were that kind of cop.
Yeah, but, once again, James Woods, you're one of like 100 people whose house is lost, and I laugh at it. So fuck you, James Woods. I'm glad you lost your house, and you cried about it on the news. Fuck you, asshole. I'm just going to say that.
Cried about how expensive insurance was, which is a thing that that he doesn't want any normal person to have.
Yeah, it couldn't have happened to a worse person. Fuck you, James Woods. Oh, God. And speaking of people who should go fuck themselves, Brian, this is the problematic review that I want to include on here. Even more problematic than the guy who just curtly said, oh, she got raped. It's even worse than that.
I mean, that guy's just saying what's in the film, to his credit.
No, to be fair, that's true. That's true. But either way, our next reviewer here is from Marriage Coach 1. So, yeah, gives this 5 stars. And the head of the review says...
Wow, I would say that this couple sure could have used Marriage Coach 1.
Yeah, really. Oh, God. When I read this review, I said, no fucking way. I promise you, this is like revolting.
He sees David and Amy coming in, and his eyes turn to dollar signs.
Yeah. Oh, God. So the header of this review says, raw graphic sex and violence. And the body of the review says, the unrated version did not differ from the movie I saw in theaters. It is one of the most controversial, violent movies of all time. Just don't expect anything more graphic in the unrated version. The rated version is completely graphic enough. Dustin Hoffman plays a quote-unquote spot-on performance here, but he is matched in every way with the new ingenue 19-year-old ingenue? I've never seen it before. Ingenue. There we are. 19-year-old Susan George, who had an infinitely more difficult role to play. And then this sentence here, this was the one that made me go, what the fuck? I literally yelled, what the fuck, when I read it. In many ways, I believe that it unleashed and gave permission to women to act out their rough sex fantasies.
Oh!
Yeah, that was one I'm just like, please don't be a marriage coach.
Fucking degenerate.
Yeah, I was just disgusted.
He's really putting on his thinking cap for this one. Let me put on my marriage coach cap while I watch Straw Dogs.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. The movie is old, but stands the test of time very well. And the sequel remake is a shadow of the original, which fair, I guess. And then this final sentence here is incredible. The reviewer is the author of the new Kindle book entitled Sex Education for Adults, Secrets to Amazing Sex and Happily Ever After 2.
Oh my God. Fuck you, dude.
It was amazing. I tried going into this person's Amazon review section. This was the only review they posted.
They were like, I gotta talk about how women get horny for the rape scene in Straw Dogs. As a sex coach and marriage counselor.
That's insane. Listen, it's one of those things, right, where obviously women have sexual fantasies. Some of them include, obviously, domination.
Yeah, who cares?
Submission.
Yeah.
Sure, right, obviously. But I don't think any woman watched this and got the inspiration to try this. Maybe the secretary or something, but not this.
Well, maybe they did, but I feel like if you're, as a man watching this and that's your immediate takeaway, maybe some women did. I don't know. I don't know what goes on in every single person's head. But if you as a man are watching this and thinking, I bet some broads are getting horny for this, then that's fucking sus.
Yeah, it was rough. Honestly, that was the worst review.
That's literally the worst review you've ever had on the show, I think, too.
That's why I only want to include one problematic one, because I'm like, this is so revolting. I can't include more problematic reviews than that. That was horrible.
I see.
And by the way, this was on the second page of the Amazon reviews, so I'm like, no fucking way. Are you serious?
My God.
Oh, God. And then our final review here. This one's not problematic, but this one is from somebody who clearly is not able to look at this movie as objectively, I don't think, as us. But either way, this person, Laredo, gave this 1 star. And the head of the review says, rape good, feminist bad, so long as nerd wins.
That's really not. I mean, look, there's problems with this movie. I understand people not liking it, but go on.
No, yeah. in the body of the review says, this piece of misogynist crap from the early 70s has been justified by mostly male critics for far too long. Though kudos to the one guy in the line of reviewers brave enough to voice his feelings on the contrary. Once again, we have the boring premise of enigmatic, teasing sex kitten who ultimately deserves everything that happens to her. I don't really quite agree with that.
I think that there's an argument to be made, but I really do not think so. I think Amy is really the emotional center of the film, is the trauma that she's gone through. Whether it's handled realistically or it's handled tastefully is debatable, but I don't think it's that simple. It's like, oh, she deserved that. I don't think that's what we're meant to see in the film.
No, and on top of that, too, I think the fact that she actually doesn't get a resolution is actually kind of the point of the movie, to be honest with you.
Exactly.
Not going to say that's good or bad, but if you recognize that's bad, that's good that you recognize that's bad.
Yes, that's very well put.
Like, I doubt Sam Peckinpah was done rapping. He's like, well, clapping my hands here, that bitch deserved it. I doubt that was what he was thinking at the end of this fucking movie. I don't know. I could be wrong, but that doesn't strike me as a Sam Peckinpah opinion. I'm going to be honest.
In the rather infamous Playboy interview where he discusses this film at length, he says some pretty troubling things, but at no point does he indicate anything like that. He does seem to view the act as like a very brutal, degrading, and like inhumane act in his discussion of this. Like, that does seem to be his intent, which I think is pretty obvious when you watch the film, personally.
Yeah, totally. And boring, cold nerd who ultimately triumphs over the bullies who used to beat him up on
the
playground.
No, he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy. Okay, hang on. This is a thing I was thinking. So I read a lot of modern reviews for this film, and there's a lot of things. This is a problematic movie. There are things that take issue within it. But there's a lot of people that don't seem to understand that David is also bad. And I feel like if they understood that, they would not think the film was as misogynist as they do. Because if you look at this film as David also being a bad guy, I think it's much more clearly about the indignities and inhumanities that women are made to suffer. But if you are watching this film and at face value goes, oh, David is the good guy. So this horrible thing happens to his wife, but then he achieves catharsis over it. Like, if somehow you watch this and you think that David is supposed to be good, then I think you will see this as purely misogynist trash. But if you, and it's pretty obvious he's like an asshole, and he himself is abusive to his wife, emotionally abusive to her, and towards the end physically abusive, then I think you see that it's more nuanced than that. I don't know why so many people see this and they think that David is like this good, supposed to be this good aspirational character. He's clearly not. It's so frustrating to me.
No, 100%. I wouldn't be quite so bitter, except that the lighting is dull, the dialogue wouldn't, the camera work uninspired, and the editing primordial in the relationship's ridiculous. I couldn't disagree more. I think this film is masterfully made. I think this is an incredibly well-made movie.
No, there is lots to debate about the content and the subject matter. As a piece of filmmaking, it is brilliant. It is.
No, 100%. I sense that the odd consensus on how great this film is stems from the mostly male audience and filmmakers' deep hatred of the women who rejected them.
Come on! What are we in 2015?
For a visceral revenge. Which, by the way,
Sam Peckinpah is Gamergate.
This is one of those things where you are absolutely seeing something in this movie that is not, or even the people that like this movie, that is just, I'm sorry, not there. You're taking your personal baggage in this fucking movie.
Straw Dogs is just like when men call me stupid on Twitter.
Yeah. Those manspreading shit.
Like, come on, man.
And the righteous ending is a way to make it all seem as if there was a higher purpose to their venal rage. That's the thing.
What's righteous?
There is no righteous. There's no higher purpose. The movie ends with basically everybody losing. What higher purpose is there?
Look, I will concede that sometimes filmmakers who make violent films kind of want to have their cake and eat it too. And Peckinpah did that with The Wild Bunch. They make this really exciting, cathartic, violent movie. And then when they're called on it, they say, oh, I'm actually campaigning against violence, not glorifying it. And Scorsese's done that. Peckinpah did that with The Wild Bunch. When with The Wild Bunch, it's clearly a cathartic, exciting, violent movie. There is no point in Straw Dogs where the violence is cathartic. There is no point where the violence is enjoyable. This film does not portray violence as anything except for pretty much horrendous.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the violence in here, it's gritty and awful, and it's not fulfilling in any way. It's just not like some fucking 80s slasher movie where the gore is the purpose. Like, really? Oh, God. What are we supposed to get out of all this? That only the nerds are allowed to be sexist, brutal pigs? That women really are one-dimensional sex objects that deserve to be raped over and over again on camera? Once again, that is not what this movie is trying to fucking say.
Look, the thing is, if you watch this movie and you were really upset by it and you brought up feelings that you'd rather not think about, I think that's perfectly valid. But, that's not what the movie is. It's just not. It's just not, man.
My question is this. Why wasn't Susan George asked about how or what she thought of all this? She actually was on many occasions.
She was. Yeah, she was. I mean, she did the movie.
I suspect it was because her hatred of the film would have made it impossible to put a good spin on it.
What? No! You're just... Okay, whenever people do this, they imagine... They want to make, like, a woman into a victim. People do this with, like, Marilyn Monroe or something. They'll go, like, I bet she would have hated this, and she felt so degraded by it. It's like, well, you don't know that. You're kind of, like, taking her autonomy away, you know? People
totally.
do this with... What's her name? That was in The Shining.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Olive oil. Obviously not olive oil, but I know what you're talking about.
But, like, people will go, like, oh, you know, she was abused by Kubrick, and you know, and then she'll say, no, we had a good work relationship. I wanted to do the movie. I was happy to do it. And they'll go, oh, you just think that because you were abused so badly, but he actually ruined your life. People always want to do this with women that were in what they perceive to be problematic art, is like infantilize them and make them into victims.
Yeah,
it's so
Shelley
fucking
Duvall.
weird.
Shelley
Duvall, thank you.
And then the final sentence here is hilarious. The only positive I think I can see coming from this piece of cinema dreck is its use as an accurate dating barometer. Just innocently ask any guy what he thinks of Straw Dogs, and if he says he really liked it, run like hell!
I mean, you really liked it in what way? Is he like, yeah, it's really cool?
Yeah, I loved it. I think David's a badass. Like, I don't know, maybe, I guess, but I don't know if anybody actually thinks that, let's be honest.
I mean, probably someone does, but they're really fucking dumb if they do.
Yeah. But that is that last really stupid review here. So that is the Amazon review section. Brian, do we have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables?
Yeah, Taylor, actually, if you don't mind, I want to do something a little different for my final thought. Obviously, we just spoke about this film at length, but listeners will know I have referred to the author Neil Fullwood a number of times on the show. Pretty foundational for me in how I think about film and just my taste in film. He's a poet. He was a Jeremy Corbyn supporter and activist throughout the 2010s. He wrote this book called 100 Violent Films That Changed Cinema, which of course I've mentioned on the show before. He also wrote the book The Films of Sam Peckinpah, which I learned a lot from as a kid, and the book 100 Sex Scenes That Changed Cinema. They're all highly recommended to listeners. In 100 Violent Films That Changed Cinema, he does write for a couple paragraphs about Straw Dogs, and I just wanted to read some of that because I think he really does succinctly describe the film, at least as he sees it. It's in a chapter called Representation, which is an essay on portrayals of rape in cinema. Most films that feature scenes of rape do so without regard to the psychological implications of the act or to its aftermath. Peckinpah's Straw Dogs treats the subject with more gravity than most films of its ilk, containing a scene that, while significantly less protracted than I Spit on Your Grave, doesn't let the audience off easily. Moreover, it never loses sight of its victimized heroine, Amy, as the emotional center of the film. Her trauma effectively contrasted with the dehumanization through use of violence of first her tormentors and then her husband David. Laden with a notorious reputation by dint of a video ban that has only recently been repealed, it has as little in common with the average video nasty title as a Rembrandt has with a heavy metal album cover. It should be also noted that Peckinpah also deals with the aftermath, and deals with it seriously. Amy's fear and trauma are the focal points of the rape scene itself. Her aggressors are depicted as being nothing more than brutal and animalistic, emotions that carry over into a subsequent sequence where David and Amy attend a church social. David has no idea of the attack his wife has been subject to. He sees out the remainder of the film in complete ignorance, and while he is coolly amused by a magic show that was staged for the village children, Amy goes through hell under the leering gaze of the men who violated her. David's non-awareness of Amy's rape infuses the film's denouement with an even more critical view of the use of violence. When he turns on his attackers, it is not out of revenge for his wife, but because they have dared threaten the sanctity of his home. I will not permit violence against this house, he declares, and loses no time in using excessive amounts of it himself. Utilizing gun, poker, and even a man-trap, David dispatches his antagonists with clinical proficiency. Unusually among Peckinpah's protagonists, he survives to the end credits, but it is clear that his humanity is dead. I apologize for that lengthy reading. I'm a big fan of Neil Fullwood. I actually tried to contact him in preparation for our Peckinpah series, but I could only find his personal Facebook, and I didn't want to bug him like that, you know. But I just felt that was a really succinct summation of at least a more generous interpretation of this film.
No, totally. I 100% agree with all that. And for my final thoughts, I think this is a film that obviously I think deserves its very notorious and infamous reputation, not as a thing to condemn, obviously, but this is a movie that is obviously one of those things where if you have a deep history with, sexual violence in your life or is triggering to you, this is definitely a trigger warning movie and even a trigger warning review. But at the same time...
And I'm not a trigger warning guy generally, but yeah.
No, for sure. And this is a movie that I think is a very well-made movie. Obviously, I love the performances in here. I love the setting. I love the colors. I love the way it's shot. Both my viewings of this movie, it just breezed by for me. Like, this is, I would say even more so than Wild Bunch. Even though I did like the Wild Bunch quite a bit, I did like this more just because it's more of my speed when it comes to length and location and style of film. Not say Wild Bunch is bad, but I definitely liked this movie quite a bit more. And
no, that makes sense for like your taste. I feel like this kind of psychological dynamics in this would be more interesting to you.
Oh yeah. And also I like green environments more than I like desert environments. I'm just going to be honest with you. And having just been to England, last year now as of recording this, like it was almost kind of nostalgic going back to and seeing like the fucking English countryside. It was kind of cool seeing that a little bit. But yeah, this is a very well-made movie. This is a very complicated movie. This is not a movie that I think you can watch in one go and truly get a full experience on this movie. But this is a movie that, in all honesty, this is a movie that really makes you think. And I mean that. Some people have called this a fascist work of art, which I don't know if I entirely agree with. I could definitely understand the interpretation that somebody would call this fascist.
There is an argument to be made.
There is 100% an argument to be made for sure. And as I mentioned earlier, this is maybe one of the most nihilistic movies ever made, or at least the very least one of the most nihilistic big budget movies ever made. There are very few heroes in this movie, if any.
The closest thing to a hero that we have is Amy.
Yes, Amy, and I would say Janice too. She's pretty innocent.
Okay, yeah.
But either way, but yes, that is our review of this, once again, very controversial Sam Peckinpah movie. So without further ado, let's get into our pluggables. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, please follow and subscribe to us on both our YouTube and our Spotify, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, Robert are creating a fantastic series. They need definitely more moral and financial support to get their series off the ground. Last time I checked, as of tonight, they had over $2,000 in donations, but they're still 80% short of their goal of producing the rest of the 9 episodes. But still, 20% is not a bad place to be at the moment, I will say. But if you want to donate to the campaign, obviously, they're good friends of ours. And if you donate to the campaign and, just send us an email, put a YouTube comment in there and just show us proof you donated, we will, within reason, about $20-25, match your donation. So please support our good friends Scott, Sean, and Robert so we can make their series become a reality. And as well, of course, we've been doing these last few episodes now. We will, of course, put the unofficial Luigi Mangione Defense Fund crowdfund there. You can donate to it if you want. It's being ran by people that we are familiar with. I've met one of them who's involved, or at least a spokesperson for it. I can at least somewhat verify that this is a legit thing going to a good cause, but this is still technically unofficial. So if you don't want to donate and don't feel comfortable with it, that's obviously totally fine.
Right.
But we, as a podcast, we feel this is a worthy thing to donate because we not only want Luigi, of course, to have a free and fair trial, but we, of course, want other people who may get those funds, because Luigi and his attorney said they're probably not going to take those donations. But either way, those donations will go to a good cause. So as far as we're aware of, this will go to a good cause.
And arguably, maybe more important, don't stop talking about Luigi. Don't let him fall out of the news cycle the way everything does these days. This is an important thing. Whatever, like what happens to him is important, but also the way that it unified people is important. I don't know that I've seen people as unified in a single thing as they were since like Epstein. So keep that in mind. This is not over. Don't forget it. Don't let it just become another engagement thing. It's worth talking about. It's the first good thing that's happened for normal people like us in a long, long time. Do not stop thinking about Luigi Mangione. Do not stop talking about him. Don't stop fucking arguing about him. If that's what you feel like you need to do, I don't argue online anymore, but if you want to, please do it. Just keep people aware of what's going on. That this isn't some spree shooter, that this is a person who's being tried for as a terrorist, basically, with no evidence, with purely circumstantial evidence, who is found in really weird ways.
Yeah, ways that, in all honesty, are probably not only explicitly illegal,
right?
But also
that's what I'm getting at.
Very deeply problematic for a future that has any amount of privacy in it for us. So either way, this case has so many conflicting things and so many conflicts that Americans should take seriously.
Yeah, I know the news cycle works fast. I know we're all tired. I know it fucking sucks to hear the news. And like, do you need his politics to be exactly like yours? Come on. No, this guy needs a real trial, a fair trial. He was fucking marched out, surrounded by fucking federal agents for this one guy, this kind of goofy looking guy who we don't really have any evidence has ever really been a violent or dangerous person, you know?
Exactly.
Like, is that the future? Is that the America you want to live in? That was Biden's America. What do you think it's going to be like under fucking Trump? You think it's going to be better?
No, and that's the thing is that by the time this episode releases, Trump will be president.
Yeah, how do you feel about that? That's what happened to him under fucking Biden. That's what happened to fucking Israel under Biden. Remember that. So it's not getting better.
No. The march of American decline into authoritarianism continues regardless who's president. But you know what, Brian? Oh, I was going to say, do you have any pluggables too, Brian?
Follow us at Millennials Are Old, the Facebook page, and Millennials Are Old Pod on Threads and Instagram. Also, I've kind of stepped away from my personal social media with new people. I used to be very online, used to make a lot of friends online. I kind of don't these days. Taylor will be able to tell you it was once a big part of my life. But you know what? You can find me, my personal account, at Threads at JLo Biafra, all one word, JLOBIAFRA. Portmanteau of JLo and JLo Biafra. I know it's very funny. I'm very clever. I'm pretty active on there. I know it's shitty and it's connected to IG and Facebook, but I'm having a good time on there. If you want to follow me at JLo Biafra on Threads, go ahead.
Hell yeah, absolutely. And of course, we'll post all the links in here. We will also post some other things. Did you have an actual excerpt of that Neil Fullwood thing, or did you just have the book?
I just read directly from the book. The specific book referenced was 100 Violent Films That Changed Cinema. Again, would recommend to anyone that enjoys our podcast. It was very important for me. I asked my mom for it for Christmas when I was probably 11, and she tracked it down for me. And then I know this story is that she gave it to me for Christmas, but before that, she made my oldest brother look at it because she was concerned that it might not be appropriate for me. And my brother had to vouch for me and say, no, this is a good book for Brian. He's going to learn a lot about this. It talks about everything really well. And to this day, it's one of my favorite pieces on film. Neil Fullwood isn't like famous. Like, he's just this British guy that studied creative writing and wrote a couple books about movies and writes poetry. And he's like, he's like an anti-Tory guy, but he's, for me, a big influence on how I think about film. I would highly recommend you check out 100 Violent Films That Changed Cinema and anything else that he writes, because he's a cool guy.
All right, cool. All right, so I believe that is our episode here. And you know what, Brian? Speaking of straw dogs, I'm tired as shit. You might even call me dog tired, but unlike a dog, I don't have to sleep on straw tonight. I get to sleep in a bed.
Well, I'm feeling a little Cornish myself. I think it's time for me to retire for the evening.
I'm feeling a little corny too.
Do I make you corny, baby? See, now we're back to the old millennial stuff.
I'm just going to do JD scatting real quick. I'm wearing my fucking kilt and my Adidas tracksuit. By the way, I obviously didn't mention this earlier in the show, but I saw a show the other day where a guy was dressed up in the purple sequence Korn like tracksuit. He was the vocalist of the headlining band, and he also had Rob Flynn's fucking braids. He looked like Rob Flynn, and he was dressed like fucking 94 fucking Korn with the Adidas tracksuit and everything. So based as fuck. That guy is based.
Shout out, friend of the pod. Respect.
Absolutely. So yeah, we're going to be two sleepy based dogs tonight. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight, and we have one hell of a special episode next time.